Welcome to the US Eagle Claw YouTube channel. The fact that the war in Ukraine is going badly for the Russian army is hurting the Kremlin more and more every day. Putin's staff, who are against the war, have been reacting against Putin since March, and some have abandoned their posts and left Russia. The rest still create the impression that they support the Russian president. However, there are also claims that the situation is different from this. The reputation of the Russian president in Ukraine in recent days and the fact that he has completely fallen out of favor with the Russian people has mobilized some Kremlin staff. In recent days, very serious intelligence reports have been published in the Kremlin that the balance has been upset and the cards are being redealt. On the one hand, the collapse of the Russian economy is a fundamental problem for Putin. On the other hand, we are going through a period where the view that Vladimir Putin is harming Russia is being spoken more loudly. This is one of the most dangerous possibilities for Vladimir Putin. But the other problem is seen as the fight between Putin's staff in the Kremlin. The biggest supporters of Putin, Kadyrov, the leader of Chechnya, and Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, began to harshly criticize the Russian army and therefore the Russian defense minister Sergei Shoigu due to the losses in Ukraine. They blame Shoigu for the failures of Russian generals stationed in Ukraine. Considering that these two names have had a very serious say in the Kremlin lately, the probability of an earthquake in the Kremlin very soon increases. In fact, it is among the information that Shoigu was greatly disturbed by the fact that Kadyrov and Prigozhin gained such privileges. We will examine these moves in detail, but it already seems certain that it is only a matter of time before a major war breaks out in the Kremlin between Putin's staff. Russia's military command has come under harsh criticism for the halted offensive in Ukraine. Two voices in particular stood out: Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov and founder of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. The two men are not officially at the head of any Russia's military or security establishment, and yet somehow they are allowed to criticize military commanders together and praise each other's views. Russia's war in Ukraine has ruined the image of its army as an efficient and well-managed unit, from its failure to deliver on state television's promise that Kiev would be captured within 3 days, to its withdrawal from most of Ukrainian territory. General Sergei Surovikin, the newly appointed commander of Russian forces in Ukraine, claimed that so far he has only been successful in blowing up Ukrainian power plants. But the fact that these two men were not silenced for what would otherwise be seen as an unheard-of display of infidelity shows that Vladimir Putin took their ideas into consideration. The fate of Colonel General Alexander Lapin is an example of this. According to widespread reports, he was dismissed in late October as one of the top Russian commanders in Ukraine. This is one of the things that worries Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Ramzan Kadyrov had identified him as incompetent only 2 days ago and blamed him for recent defeats, including the recapture of the eastern town of Lyman by Ukrainian forces in early October. The Chechen leader said on social media that General Lapin should be demoted and sent to the front as a private. Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin also joined in with the criticism. He circumnavigated Russia's prison system and enlisted convicts to fight in Ukraine. Such influence would not have been possible without permission from the highest level. He even went so far as to praise the Ukrainian Volodymyr Zelensky as a tough, confident, pragmatic, and amiable man. Despite going this far, the inviolability of Kadyrov and Prigozhin drew the attention of not only Shoigu, one of the Kremlin staff, but all of them. In fact, some military analysts said that Prigozhin recently had the power to make a move for the presidency of Russia. On the other hand, there are allegations that Kadyrov is waiting to push the button for the full independence of Chechnya. But before these moves are made, it is stated that they want to equalize all of Putin's staff one by one. So who are Prigozhin and Kadyrov, who wield so much power? Yevgeny Prigozhin first rose to prominence with the nickname Putin's Chief for catering to official events in the Kremlin. A businessman from St. Petersburg, Russia's second-largest city, is said to have known Vladimir Putin in the 1990s when he worked in the mayor's office and frequented the restaurant popular with local officials. By the 2010s, several journalistic investigations had linked him to a so-called troll factory in St. Petersburg, a disinformation unit whose reported role is to discredit the Russian political opposition online and portray the Kremlin in a positive light. In 2016, the troll factory was part of Russia's attempt to interfere in the US presidential election, according to an investigation by Robert Mueller, the US special advisor at the time. Prigozhin denied any ties to the troll factory, but later said, we interfered, and we will continue to interfere in the US elections. How to do it carefully, accurately, and surgically, and in our own way, as we know it. For many years, he also denied affiliation with a mercenary recruiting company called the Wagner Group. Wagner first appeared in eastern Ukraine in 2014, and his fighters later surfaced in Syria and many African countries. Recently, he admitted that he was behind Wagner, which proved to be one of the most effective Russian troops in the war in Ukraine. He was also locked in a feud with St. Petersburg governor Alexander Beglov for years, going so far as to accuse him of aiding the Ukrainian army. Few Putin allies are as fiercely loyal to him as Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov, who was chosen by the Russian leader to lead the autonomous republic in the North Caucasus region in 2007. In the 1990s, Chechnya fought unsuccessfully for independence. Under Mr. Kadyrov, all attempts at Chechnya's independence have stalled, while human rights have deteriorated, and his private Kadyrovsky militia has been accused of widespread abuse. A vocal supporter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine from the beginning, Kadyrov sent troops and claimed they were among the best trained, bravest, and ruthless units in Russia's invasion force. They may be ruthless, but their men have also been branded TikTok troops by some commentators and are more interested in posting videos of their exploits on social media than actually fighting in the war. Human rights activists say a significant proportion of Chechen soldiers were recruited against their will after their families were threatened with blackmail or physical violence. The Chechen leader was promoted from brigadier general to colonel as a sign that his loyalty was appreciated by the Kremlin. So these two men were suddenly appointed to incredibly important posts. But what was the reason for this? Mr. Kadyrov and Mr. Prigozhin, who were never considered allies before, seem to be more and more compatible lately. The Chechen leader labeled the St. Petersburg businessman a born warrior and the Wagner mercenaries as fearless patriots of Russia. The Wagner leader returned the compliment and praised the Chechen leader. Both names are critical of the military establishment, represented by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and his deputy and chief of staff, General Valery Gerasimov. Amid the atmosphere of naming and blaming those responsible for failures in Ukraine, this could be their chance to gain more influence at the top. Commentators believe that neither the Chechen leader nor the Wagner chief individually carry enough weight. They are not very popular among the official political elite and are seen as foreigners. But if they joined forces, they could challenge those in President Putin's inner circle as cracks keep surfacing. Russian political analyst Abbas Galyamov says that Mr. Kadyrov and Mr. Prigozhin are acting quite unusually for a country at war. It describes an atmosphere of anarchy where the commanders of different military units argue with each other instead of fighting as a team. Two broad factions are believed to be in President Putin's inner circle: those who are in favor of stopping the war and those who'd like to continue the war in order to save assets frozen by Western sanctions. These two men want the war to continue. That may be the message the Russian leader is most eager to hear, and he may choose to hold them closer. But this is a sword that could bring the end of Vladimir Putin, because even if the blunt side seems to give power to him, the sharp side of the sword can cut him in half when it turns against Putin. Thanks for watching us.